They say money can't buy peace, but I've learned it can certainly attract chaos. My name is Evelyn Moore, and for most of my life, I never thought I'd have to hide anything from the people I loved. But sometimes, the very people you raise, feed, and welcome into your home turn into strangers with knives behind their smiles. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? I always love seeing how far our stories travel. So, if you're here, take a second to subscribe, hit that little bell, and settle in, because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when silence meets greed. Now, let's get back to the story. I grew up in a small town tucked between rolling hills and quiet neighborhoods where everyone knew each other's business. I was a dreamer once, an artist, a young woman who believed kindness and hard work could fix anything. But life had other plans. My husband Thomas passed away when our daughter Sophie was just 10 years old. The accident left me with a broken heart and a mountain of debt. For years, I worked as a bookkeeper, quietly learning the language of numbers, taxes, and investments. Every night after Sophie went to bed, I would sit at my kitchen table with a second-hand laptop, researching mutual funds, rental properties, and stocks. I started small, saving a few dollars from every paycheck, and when one of my small investments doubled in value, I realized something important. Knowledge could be my armor. While Sophie grew up believing we lived a modest life, I was building a quiet empire behind the scenes. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't tell anyone. The world didn't need to know I was turning my sorrow into strength. Every penny I earned was for Sophie, for her education, her future, her happiness. By the time Sophie turned 24, my hidden portfolio was worth more than I ever dreamed. Nearly $3 million spread across accounts and trusts, all under discreet names. I had planned to reveal it someday, maybe as a surprise when Sophie started her own family. But love has a strange way of blinding even the wisest hearts. Sophie met Daniel at a corporate retreat, where she worked as an assistant in the HR department. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who knew how to say the right thing at the right time. I had my doubts, but I saw how happy he made my daughter, how Sophie smiled like a child again when he was around. Against my instincts, I gave my blessing, hoping this was one of those fairy tales that life occasionally rewards you with after years of grief. The wedding was small but beautiful. Daniel promised to take care of Sophie, to build a life together full of laughter and love. I offered to pay for everything, the dress, the flowers, the venue, all without mentioning where the money came from. I told myself it was just a mother's duty, a final gift before I finally retired from worry. But peace never lasts long in stories like these. A few months after the wedding, I began noticing small changes in Daniel. He had expensive new watches, spoke about business ventures, and took mysterious phone calls late at night. Sophie dismissed my concerns. "He's just ambitious, Mom," she'd say with that sweet smile. "He's trying to build something for us." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But one morning, when Daniel dropped by the house unannounced while Sophie was away, his mask slipped. He sat across the table from me, a smirk tugging at his lips, and said words I would never forget. "I didn't know you were sitting on that much money, Evelyn. Quite a little empire you've got tucked away in those accounts." My stomach turned cold. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You see, I came across something, your investment statements. Impressive numbers for someone who still drives a 10-year-old car." I didn't move. I just watched him, my pulse echoing in my ears. Daniel smiled wider. "Here's the thing. I've got debts, big ones, and you're going to help me pay them off. If you don't, well, I can't guarantee Sophie's life will stay as comfortable as it is now. You wouldn't want your daughter to suffer because of your greed, would you?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in, the air thick with betrayal. I had spent my entire life protecting my daughter, and now the man I trusted to love her was threatening to destroy her. Daniel stood up, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. "You've got 1 week," he said coldly. "After that, I start talking." He walked out of my house with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. I sat in silence long after he left, staring at the sunlight falling across the table. My hands trembled as I reached for my cup, but it had gone cold. I thought of Sophie, of her laughter, her innocence, and felt something shift deep inside me. It wasn't just fear. It was the quiet spark of a mother who'd fought through storms before and learned how to survive. And as I looked out the window, watching Daniel's car disappear down the street, I whispered to myself, "You've made a terrible mistake." Son, I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a war I didn't start, and one I fully intended to finish. When Daniel left that evening, his smug grin still lingering in the air like the smell of cheap cologne, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, motionless, quiet, but burning inside. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound filling the silence. The same refrigerator that once held lunchboxes for my daughter's school days. The same room where birthdays were celebrated, cakes cut, laughter shared. And now, that space, my safe place, felt poisoned by the venom of my son-in-law's threats. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, Daniel's words came back. "Either you pay me, or I ruin her life." It wasn't about money anymore. It was about power, about control. I knew that type of man. I had seen his kind before, charming to outsiders, cruel behind closed doors, manipulative enough to turn victims into villains. But I wasn't the kind of woman who bowed icily when dawn finally broke. I sat at my dining table, a cup of untouched coffee beside me, pen in hand, scribbling numbers onto a yellow notepad. Years of saving, investing, and building had taught me discipline. I knew exactly how much I had. I could have easily paid Daniel's debts, cleared them all with a single signature. But doing so would mean surrender. It would mean giving a parasite permission to keep feeding. And I was no one's prey. Still, I couldn't ignore the danger. Daniel wasn't bluffing. I had seen the way he looked at my daughter, Sophie, like she was both a possession and a pawn. And Sophie, poor thing, still believed she'd married a man who loved her. My chest ached at the thought. If only she knew. So I made a decision, one I hadn't made lightly. If Daniel wanted to play a game, I would learn the rules faster than him. Over the next few days, I did something no one expected from a woman my age. I began to plan. Quietly, strategically. I pulled out old contacts. People I'd helped over the years, an accountant I once mentored, a lawyer who owed me a favor, a retired detective I had supported through my charity foundation. Each of them received a call, brief and deliberate. No details. Just a simple request. "I need your help," quietly. Meanwhile, Daniel started circling closer. He sent me text messages, all polite on the surface, but dripping with threat underneath. "Morning, Mum. Thought we could talk about that financial issue. You wouldn't want Sophie to find out about it, would you? I'm sure we can come to a friendly arrangement." I didn't respond. I wanted him to grow comfortable, overconfident. Because a man like Daniel always made mistakes when he thought he was in control. One morning, Sophie came over unexpectedly. I was in my study, sorting through papers, when my daughter appeared in the doorway, holding a bouquet of daisies. "Hi, Mum," Sophie said softly. "I just wanted to see how you're doing. You've been quiet lately." I looked up and smiled, hiding my exhaustion behind grace. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just busy with the Foundation's new project. The one for the Children's Therapy Center. Sophie asked, placing the flowers in a vase. Yes, I said. We're expanding to another city next spring. That's amazing, Mom. She hesitated. Daniel's been talking about investments too. He says we should start something together. Maybe use your expertise. My hand froze around my teacup. Really, what kind of investment? Oh, Sophie said vaguely. He's just been exploring. Real estate, stocks, things like that. He's been meeting people lately, says they're potential partners. I smiled tightly. I knew what that meant. He was fishing for new marks. Later that day, when Sophie left, I walked straight into my study and opened a locked drawer. Inside were years of records, my private portfolio, every account, every business I'd quietly built while pretending to live modestly. Few knew I was the silent partner in 3 real estate firms and 2 eco-startups. It had been my secret, a quiet triumph I never needed to flaunt. But now, that secret had become a weapon. And in the right hands, it could destroy Daniel completely. Over the next week, I began gathering evidence discreetly. I met with my lawyer, Mr. Halvorsen, an old friend from my late husband's days. He had aged, but his eyes were sharp. Evelyn, he said, leaning forward, are you sure you want to pursue this? If what you're saying is true, Daniel could face prison. My voice didn't tremble. He deserves worse. But I'm not doing this for revenge, Halvorsen. I'm doing this for my daughter before he breaks her completely. He nodded. Then we'll need documentation. Bank transfers, hidden accounts, evidence of coercion. And I'll get in touch with someone who can verify his debts. I already have someone, I said, sliding a name across the table. Detective Laurel. She owes me a favor. Over the next several days, I worked in silence. My house became a command center, receipts laid out in careful rows, voice recordings from my calls with Daniel, messages printed and filed. Every piece of data was a thread, and I was weaving a web around him, thread by thread. Meanwhile, Daniel kept pushing. He stopped by my house unannounced, bringing flowers and fake smiles. Mum, he said one evening, strolling in without knocking, we can make this easy. Just a simple transfer, and this all goes away. I poured myself tea. I'm still thinking about it. Daniel grinned. Don't think too long. Sophie doesn't handle stress well, I'd hate for her to find out what kind of person her mother really is. My eyes flicked up, calm but dangerous. And what kind of person is that, Daniel? He leaned in closer, his voice a whisper. A liar? Someone who hides wealth? Someone who doesn't trust her family? I smiled faintly. If you believe that, dear, you've underestimated me. He didn't notice the small camera hidden behind the picture frame on the bookshelf, recording every word. After he left, I called Detective Laurel. I have your proof, I said simply, and he gave it to me himself. The next 48 hours were crucial. Laurel's team began digging into Daniel's finances. What they found was worse than expected. Unpaid debts, fraudulent loans, money siphoned from Sophie's joint account, and evidence of offshore transfers under fake business names. He wasn't just in debt, he was drowning in it. My lawyer moved fast. Legal documents were drafted, evidence compiled, and a quiet injunction was filed, preventing Daniel from touching any asset under my or Sophie's name. By the time Daniel realized what had happened, it was too late. The following weekend, Sophie invited me over for dinner. She wanted to talk. I arrived early, wearing my usual understated elegance, a soft grey shawl and pearls. Daniel greeted me at the door, that forced politeness back in place. Evelyn, he said with false warmth. Glad you could join us. Always happy to see my daughter, I replied smoothly. Throughout dinner, Daniel tried to act normal, but I could see the tension behind his smile, the way his hand twitched near his phone, the way his eyes darted toward my purse like he expected me to pull out a check. He was nervous, and nervous men made mistakes. Halfway through dessert, Sophie excused herself to take a call. The moment she stepped away, Daniel leaned forward. "We need to settle this," he hissed. "We already have," I said calmly, sipping my tea. "You just don't know it yet. What are you talking about?" I leaned in, my voice low. "You made one fatal mistake, Daniel. You thought I was afraid of losing money, but what you should have feared was me losing patience." He frowned, confused, then froze as the doorbell rang. Detective Laurel stepped inside, badge in hand, flanked by 2 officers. Daniel's face drained of color. "Daniel Cooper," Laurel said firmly, "you're under arrest for fraud, blackmail, and financial coercion. You have the right to remain silent." Sophie returned from the hallway, her eyes wide with shock. "What's happening, Mum?" I stood, my tone calm but steady. "It's over, darling. You don't need to be afraid anymore." Daniel stammered. You set me up." I looked at him, eyes cold as steel. "No, you set yourself up. I just made sure the truth had witnesses." As they led him out, Sophie turned to me, trembling. "Mom, how long have you known?" My voice softened. "Long enough to protect you." That night, after the chaos, I sat alone on my porch, looking out at the dark horizon. The wind carried the faint sounds of the city, distant, calm. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. But this wasn't the end. It was merely the moment between storms, because in the silence, I realized something else. Daniel's actions had exposed more than his greed. They had exposed the cost of my secrecy. My daughter had lived in a world I built to protect her, but that same protection had blinded her from danger. And now I had to make sure Sophie learned the truth. All of it, not to shame her, but to strengthen her. As the porch light flickered softly behind me, I made a vow. The money I once guarded so carefully would no longer be just a symbol of independence. It would become something bigger. A shield, a tool, and maybe redemption. Tomorrow, I would visit the Children's Therapy Center. A new expansion needed funding, and I still had more to give. The morning after Daniel's arrest, I woke to sunlight streaming through my window, soft, golden, and clean. For the first time in a long while, I didn't wake up to the sound of my phone buzzing or the hollow ache of anxiety. Just silence, the kind of silence that felt like peace. I sat up slowly, my hands tracing the edge of the bedspread, and for a moment I simply breathed. My body was tired, but my mind was clear. The storm had passed, but the wreckage it left behind still needed tending. By noon, Sophie arrived at my house. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her voice small. She looked younger somehow, fragile, confused. I met her at the door and pulled her into a hug. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. There were no words big enough to fill that space between us. Only truth, raw and unfiltered. When we finally sat down, she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Mom?" "I could have helped." I smiled faintly. "Because, sweetheart, I wanted to protect you. I thought if I carried the weight alone, you'd never have to feel it." I paused. "But I see now that sometimes love means letting others see the darkness too, so they can understand what light truly means." Sophie nodded, wiping her tears. "He fooled me, completely. He fooled us both," I said gently. "But don't let that turn into shame. You loved someone who didn't deserve you. That's not a crime. That's just being human. For a while, we sat in silence, the ticking clock in the corner marking each second of healing. Then Sophie looked up, her voice steadier. "What will happen to him?" I poured tea into our cups, the steam curling upward like smoke. "He'll face the consequences of his choices. The law will handle the rest." I set the pot down. "But I'm not done, Sophie. There's more I need to do." Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" I leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "I built my life around being careful, hiding my success, keeping everything quiet. I thought safety came from silence. But silence almost destroyed us. So I've decided something. The foundation, the children's trust, it's time to expand it. Nationwide, we'll help the ones who don't have a voice, who are fighting in the dark, just like we did." Her lips parted in surprise. "That's incredible, Mom." I smiled softly. "It's time the world sees what women like us can do when we stop being afraid." Over the next few months, that promise became reality. The Whitford Foundation for Special Children grew from a small local project into a major network of centers across the state. Hospitals partnered with us, therapists volunteered, and media outlets began to notice the woman behind it all, the quiet widow who turned tragedy into purpose. I rarely granted interviews, but when I did, my message was always the same. Strength isn't about what you endure. It's about what you build after the breaking. Daniel, meanwhile, was sentenced to 6 years in prison for fraud and blackmail. His reputation collapsed, his debts surfaced, and the so-called friends who once admired his charm vanished overnight. I never visited him. I didn't need to. The justice I wanted wasn't in watching him suffer, it was in watching my daughter heal. And Sophie did heal. Slowly, surely, surely. She found work managing one of my charity branches, rediscovered her confidence, and learned to stand on her own 2 feet. One evening, while reviewing paperwork at her desk, she looked up at me and said quietly, "You know, Mum, I used to think you were just lucky, but now I see it wasn't luck at all. You fought for everything you have." I reached across the table, resting my hand over hers. "And now, it's your turn to fight for what matters to you." That night, after Sophie left, I stood by my window again, watching the city lights shimmer like stars caught in glass. I thought about the years I'd spent building walls, emotional ones, financial ones, thinking they would protect me. But life, I realized, was never meant to be built behind walls. It was meant to be lived out loud, with purpose, with love, with courage. I smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and whispered to myself, he tried to destroy us with greed. But all he did was remind me what I was capable of. And just like that, the chapter closed. Not with vengeance, but with victory. Not with hate, but with peace. And that, my friends, was my story, the story of how I turned betrayal into power and silence into strength. What do you think? Was I right to stay quiet and plan my revenge carefully? Or should I have confronted Daniel the moment I found out the truth? I'd love to know what you would have done in my place. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story of hidden strength and justice, make sure to like, subscribe, and join us next time for another tale where truth always